Today is March 28th, 2023. This is the 37th episode of the Sports Daily College Basketball Podcast, our 28th episode of Season 2. I'm your host, Sean Vowles, and today I'm joined by Mike Kumar. And Mike, we're down to just 4 teams left in college basketball. Pretty impressive weekend in the Sweet 16 and the Elite 8. But first, let's talk about some of the transfer portal stuff. And first, I'll ask you a little bigger arching question here is that is this fair? You know, obviously there's still teams playing, and the players their season's over, they've entered, and those teams that are already done have, they've already got started on their recruiting in the transfer portal for next year, and coaches that are still alive haven't really done that. So I wondered if you had any thoughts on that, and because it seems to be a pretty common talking point going around.
You know, right now there's only 4 teams that aren't recruiting anybody in the transfer portal. Those are the 8 teams still playing, 4 in the NIT, 4 in the NCAA Tournament, and I think probably the teams that it affects the most are the teams in the Conference USA. So, I mean, crazy enough, we're here 8 teams remaining, 3 of them are in CUSA, a conference that was dead in the water because of football about a year and a half ago. But anyways. Typically it's not, I think, a big topic of point of contention because usually the teams in the Final Four are blue bloods. And for them, it's pretty easy to recover from not being able to recruit so early because you're Duke, you're Carolina, you're Villanova, you're Kansas, you're Gonzaga, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know if it's necessarily, super unfair. I could see an argument to be made that, hey, teams should be, wait until the season fully concludes. But at the same time, most of these schools that typically make the Final Four won't have to worry about getting people in the transfer portal. I'll say that. This is kind of one year where it's an exception because of the teams you're having portal. But at the end of the day, Miami, a team that is in the Final Four, they're a team that did exceptionally well in the transfer portal last year. I don't know. It's an interesting question. For now, I wouldn't really touch it.
Yeah, I would say, you look at the calendar, it's March 28th. There's some teams that have been done for a month. Some of those conference tournaments started in February, and those teams weren't playing postseason ball. So I get why some of the teams are angry. Those coaches are going to have to do some Zoom calls and stuff while they're still playing, which doesn't really send a great message to the players, but if we talk about the transfer portal not opening until next Monday night, then those coaches basically don't do anything for a month. I would say 90% of the teams in Division I. But we'll go through a couple of the big names here that are in the transfer portal. The big one first, Mike, that we'll talk about, really the only superstar that's entered since the last time we talked. There's Kirk Kriisa we talked about last week, but Caleb Love is the big name, and with Davis and Baycott coming back, it seemed like Love was going to go, and I'm sure there'll be a ton of teams interested in him solely because of what he did last year. But you still believe in Caleb Love, or is he just a bad shot taker and sometimes a bad shot maker?
Yeah. Caleb Love still averaged almost 17 points a game last year. You wonder how good he was at sharing the ball with his teammates, especially being a point guard. Did take a lot of shots this year, despite averaging 17 points a game. He averaged taking about 15 field goals per game. It's not a great percentage that we're looking at. So he is taking a lot of shots. Nevertheless, he's still going to end up in a big-time college basketball program. I don't think it's going to be a team that typically relies on seasoned veterans. I think it's actually going to be a team that's going to pick them up. That's going to be a younger team. I would not see a team like a Baylor or a Texas going and try and get Caleb Love.
I think Indiana, my favorite team, I think they should look at him. You got a lot of players, and people are going to gamble on that month that we saw last year. He was the best player in the country that month. And this year he really struggled. I think he was in the 30s, 32% from the field or something, and it's because every shot he took was a tough shot. He never had any easy shots. He's not a catch-and-shoot three
Yeah.
guy. He's not somebody who gets to the rim a whole lot, but he can do it. I mean, I think Indiana should look at him. I would be pretty happy if we get him, but I know it didn't work out at Carolina, but I think with the right coaching and the right, defensive players around him and maybe a couple shooters that can give him a little more space, I think he could really be pretty good. Now, go through a couple of the other players here. If you don't watch college basketball that closely, you're probably not going to know who these are because there are a couple of role players. Kiki Tandy from Xavier is in the portal. Tamar Bates from Indiana. The Drame twins from St. Peter's last year, they transferred to LaSalle. They're in the portal again, so they're going to have to sit out a year if they do transfer. We got a couple St. John's guys. Got your Marion Sharp from Western Kentucky. You may not know who that is. Well, he's 7'5", so I'm sure there'll be some teams going at him. You got Graham Ike from Wyoming. Jaden Epps from Illinois. I thought he was pretty good this year for the Fighting Illini, and
That's a big one.
I would say limited minutes.
Epps was fantastic. A freshman guard. He still averaged 10 points a game.
Yeah. And
fantastic player. I think that's actually interesting, Sean. We've talked about Illinois. I think we talked about them last year, losing a lot of guys in the portal. Underwood loses players unlike I've seen many coaches do before in the transfer portal. He loses guys left and right. I think he lost 3 guys last year, 2 guys the year before. This is the first that he's lost this year. So I don't know. This just continues a very concerning trend for the Fighting Illini.
Well, we saw Sky Clark leave Illinois in the middle of the season. But he's actually
that as well.
He's committed to Louisville, so I think he'll get a lot of opportunities there. We got a couple more Xavier role players. Caesar Edwards, he saw some time in the tournament. Paxton Wojcik, the Brown guard, did commit to North Carolina. A lot of big teams were after him. He's probably the biggest commit so far. Got Ryan Langborn from Princeton, the Princeton point guard. He's in the portal. And we expect Tosan Idwonam to be in the portal also if he doesn't go to the NBA. So a couple really good Princeton players there could be picked up. Going through the list, Dean Reber from Rutgers didn't get much time this year. Caden Shedrick from Virginia, the 7-foot rim protector. I think he could really be a good player on another team. It seemed like they kind of abandoned him this year when and Vanderplas would be the 5 and they'd spread the floor, but Vanderplas broke his hand and they kind of forced Shedrick back in there. But he's a type of defensive player that can really be good. Kel Ware from Oregon, 5-star recruit. And then the other big one, Mike, is Severe Wheeler.
Kel-El. Yeah.
But, yeah, the other big one's Severe Wheeler from Kentucky.
Yeah. Kel Ware, he just went to Texas, went down to Austin. Took a look at them today with their new head coach, Rodney Terry, which we'll get to a little bit. Also, Kirk Kriisa, he is seen posting on social media about a visit to West Virginia. I think that would be an awesome fit for Kriisa playing under Coach Bob Huggins. Loves to have an athletic team, so I think it's an awesome match for him.
And we got Evan Mahaffey, the biggest player on the small Penn State team, still in the portal. Got Primo Spears. He was one of the first entrants from Georgetown. He's an all-conference Big East player. He could be a star, too. So there's definitely a lot of talent here in the portal. And I think, we're not even going to come close to making a prediction for next year, next week, because we have no idea what these teams are going to look like. Even into June and July, players could still be making their decisions. So, Mike, I think that's all the names that I thought of. Obviously, as players get committed, we'll definitely spend a lot of time on those in the off season. But the big news this week is Texas finally pulling the trigger on Rodney Terry. They removed the interim tag. I'm not sure the details of his contract, but in my opinion, I think this is the easiest thing that has happened in a while in college hoops. He brought a team that was pretty good, but they were equally as good under Terry. They won the Big 12 tournament and they got to an Elite 8. I think he would have taken that every time, even with Beard, especially with Texas' struggles in the tournament before. But I'll ask you this. I think Texas was playing with fire a little bit, waiting this long, because somebody else could have offered him the job.
Texas they offered Ronnie Terry the job the day after. And I would say Texas is a very attractive hire because one, because of the resources that you have in Austin, and two, because of the money that the school has. So I'm not surprised that Rodney Terry kind of hung around. He's a Texas guy. He was an assistant coach there for 10 years earlier with Rick Barnes. He was also a head coach at UTEP before then, assistant coach at Baylor, was a coach at numerous Texas high schools. So this was clearly the job that he wanted. I am a little surprised, Sean. I agree with you that they waited until the very end of the season to announce his extension, but that is athletic director Dallas Dawes' I guess, philosophy when he's working with interim coaches is that he wants to wait till the end of the year. Terry got a 5-year deal, so he's locked down for several years. And he's going to have a few players that are probably going to come back and be really good for Texas. Dylan Dessou, one of those guys who's going to be phenomenal for the Longhorns next year. If they can get a couple of these guys in the portal, it's going to be huge. Look, and I don't want to discredit what Chris Beard did at all at UT. Chris Beard brought a winning program and a winning staff to Texas. And I think like they did this year, and they would for years to come. At the end of the day, Texas had to let him go, but Rodney Terry has done a phenomenal job in his place, and
Yeah, and Terry has had a head coaching experience before at UTEP. Not great. That was probably what was holding people and the AD back from pulling the trigger earlier. But they do it. It's easy. At least I thought in the post game press conference after Texas lost that it wasn't. It seemed like to me that he was not going to stay because he said like I love these guys so much. I love this team. It seemed to me that he wasn't, but at the end of the day, he will stay. So the other coaching change that is looking pretty imminent here is the Texas Tech opening, but North Texas wins in the NIT, holding Wisconsin to only 13 points in the second half. So maybe that won't be announced for a couple more days, but Grant McCasland, former Baylor assistant, looks like he's going to be the next Texas Tech head coach. And I guess we're just waiting a little longer now that North Texas has won. Looks like Mike's back. Okay. But, can you hear me, Mike?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Right,
sorry about that.
So I just talked about McCasland a little bit. They actually came back and beat Wisconsin in the NIT, so it looks like that announcement is going to be a couple days.
How about the Mean Green from Denton, Texas? Grant McCasland, outstanding coach. He's done it for 6 years now at North Texas. He was a former assistant under Scott Drew at Baylor University. He's a Baylor Bear grad. Looking very likely that he's going to go to UN or to Texas Tech. It's kind of a done deal, which is a bummer to see a Baylor alum go to Scalmettes and Lubbock.
I think it'll be a tough job too because they've got not a lot coming back. Obviously, yeah. IMAC is in the portal too, and they're coming off a pretty low finish in the Big 12. So he's going to have his work cut out. But North Texas, I mean, obviously, they're in the NIT final. They were one of the best teams in a pretty good Conference USA this year. They beat Purdue in the round of 64, I believe, a couple of years ago. So he's had a top 100 team 3 years in a row at North Texas. And now he's got a chance to play for a banner. That might be against...
Yeah.
It's either going to be against Utah Valley or UAB. But obviously, Conference USA is kind of taking the headlines here in March. You've got Florida Atlantic in the Final Four. You've got North Texas now in the championship, the NIT. UAB playing for a spot in the championship. And then Charlotte winning the CBI. I believe it was Charlotte. Yep, Charlotte winning the CBI. So how about the Conference USA this March? Obviously, Florida Atlantic is going to the American next year. But they still get to claim in this Final Four for the conference. But how about this March for the Conference USA?
It's crazy how this conference, it was looking like it was going to fold about a year and a half ago. It's like really an incredible turnaround, and it really gives a reputable name to Conference USA. It really is unbelievable. So shout out to CUSA for being the best of the mid majors this year. They proved it in March.
And some people thought they should have had 2 teams in. They probably could have had 3 if you think about it. UAB pretty solid, North Texas pretty solid. It's the first Final Four from the conference since 2008 when John Calipari and Derrick Rose took Memphis to the championship game. So the 15-year gap is all it is, but that's the coaching search right now. I don't think we missed any of the other ones. Obviously, English to Providence from George Mason. He's taken a couple players with him, and a couple players are staying. But
Yeah, bring this back.
I think I think those are it. That's it. Obviously, Cal. A couple of the other schools made hires, but nothing really to note. So I guess Mike, we'll just get into it. So up on the screen are the Final Four teams.
Yeah, one
Or
thing,
go ahead,
Sean,
Mike.
I'll say is it's surprising is I think Coach May is going to be back at Port Atlantic. It doesn't appear that anybody's holding out for him right now, so he's going to stay at Fort Atlantic as they transfer the American Conference, and who knows, maybe he'll be there for the long haul and try to make them a name in the American, which is a conference with a little bit higher visibility than conferences. So.
Yeah, I mean, Florida Atlantic. I've heard the story a couple times over the past week. If you can do it there, you can pretty much do it anywhere. They don't have great facilities. The people in Boca Raton didn't even know that they had a Division I school
Don't care. Yeah.
until about a week ago. But they're in the Final Four. They won the East Region. Maybe they got a little lucky, but we'll start on the other side. We'll start with UConn, Mike. Easily, in my opinion, the favorites to win this entire thing. They handled Arkansas on Thursday, and then they handled Gonzaga again. They have not played a close game since the Big East tournament, and they've done it a couple different ways. The first 2, Iona and St. Mary's, they were second half. They were close for a half, and then they took over in the second half. But this Arkansas game, they won the first half by 17. And then against Gonzaga game was a little bit of both. They're up by 7 at the half, but UConn, I'm sure one of these games will be close, but not obviously getting to the Final Four is impressive, but these 4 huge wins is super impressive, and I don't think anybody can beat them.
Yeah, UConn just looks so good right now. They're super athletic. They've got a really deep bench. And I think that's one of the things that has really been a staple for success in March Madness the last few years is having a deep bench. Baylor, when they won, had 9 players that all played at least 15 minutes a game. Kansas, similar last year. And it's the same with UConn. And it's a team that's battle-tested because of their COVID issues earlier in the year. A lot of those players have been playing a lot of really good minutes coming down the stretch. So I would say Miami is an incredibly resilient team and has a really good backcourt, as we've talked about literally all year. I feel pretty vindicated. Even though I picked Texas to win this game, I feel pretty vindicated to have Miami in the Final Four, Sean. Pat myself on the back for that.
Yeah, and
We really called that one. But UConn, they look like they're leaps and bounds the best team, and they are the one remaining blue blood left. UConn is absolutely a blue blood college basketball team, despite their recent struggles. So I don't know. Maybe FAU or San Diego State can keep close with them, but they look so dominant right now.
I think it's really unfortunate for the sport as a whole that UConn and Miami are playing each other in the Final Four and not the championship game, because those are the 2 best teams left. No disrespect to the other 2, but that's a good transition into Miami, Mike. Miami kind of blitzed Houston. I guess that's the best way to put it. I mean, they were up by 8 at halftime. I think Houston did close it early in the second half, but they ended up winning by 14, and they made a Houston defense that is, by all measurements, pretty elite look horrendous, to be honest. And I know their spread offense is hard to guard, but with all 5 scorers being in double figures and 2 players scoring in the 20s, that was super impressive to me that they did that to Houston. I mean, nobody puts 89 up against Houston. And they only shot 51%. It's not like they shot 70.
No. And if you look at Miami's offense, it's been pretty explosive in the tournament after their first game where they kind of really snuck by Drake
Yeah,
in the first round. We very easily
they should have
could have seen
lost.
Miami out early. But ever since then, 85 points against Miami or Indiana, excuse me, in a dominating kind of win. They offense exploded against Houston for 89, and then a resilient comeback against Texas. They had 88 in that game. But what really stuck out to me, Sean, this weekend was watching how resilient they were against Texas. They were down pretty much the entire game.
By
They were down by
14 at
double
one
digits.
point.
It looked like this game was over. I had punch ticket Texas's ticket back to Houston for the Final Four, and they just chipped away in the last 8 minutes of this game. Got a couple of lucky breaks, I think, by the officiating. Officials missed a couple of calls. But, I mean, nevertheless, this Miami team's really good. And like you said, Sean, I think no disrespect to the other two teams, FAU and San Diego State. These are the best two teams remaining in the tournament.
Yeah, Miami.
So,
And I guess you could say UConn got a little bit lucky that Kansas lost. But you can't do much more than what UConn has. And Miami, they beat the 4
they
seed
beat the
Indiana.
1 seed, the 2 seed, and the 4.
And the 1 seed and the 2 seed. So sometimes you get lucky to go on tournament runs, but Miami really hasn't. And I like the Houston game. They all 5 starters in double figures again against Texas. And I think, obviously, Pack, the big game against Houston with 26, Wong at 20. And then Miller is the one who takes it against Texas with 27. He seems like a really hard matchup for any 4. He's 6'7", he's just under 200 pounds. So he's a lot quicker than most 4s. We saw it all the way back to Race Thompson with Indiana. He does not let his weight difference to most 4s matter. Yeah. And he had 27 points on 7 field goal attempts. And he made them all. And he had 13 free throws, which he made all of them. But I think, Miller scoring 27 might be a little bit of a fluke. But when you're getting 5 scores in double digits every game, that is just hard to guard. And
that's really good.
And they almost got 60% from the field against Texas. 60, and I know Kansas State put up 116 against Texas, but Texas is still a top 15 defense in the country. So
they are.
I don't think Miami's doing anything crazy defensively in this tournament. They're kind of one of those teams that you think might be primed for an early upset, super efficient on the offensive end and not defensively. They still gave up 75 to Houston. And if you had told me that Houston was going to score 75 points against Miami, I would have told you that the Cougars would have won the game. And
absolutely.
And, I get there's a lot of possessions in their games, so there's going to be more points, but Texas shot 50% from the field and 40% from 3. They're kind of winning by just scoring more points than the other team. Obviously their defense has been good, but they've only gone up 9 spots in KenPom after these 4 wins from the defensive point of view. They're still 104 in defense, so we'll preview their matchup between UConn later, but we predicted it early in the season. I think you had them winning the ACC, which they ended up doing, and I had them coming in second. So once again, we'll remind the listeners because we did get that right. Obviously, I had North Carolina winning the conference. That didn't happen, but
most people had to win the championship.
Yeah.
So.
But we're gonna keep riding that for as long as we can here. But so that's the first matchup in the Final Four. We'll go to the South region now, which is San Diego State, who came out of that region, and they on Friday beat the number 1 overall seed Alabama 71-64. Joe Meade called it last week, Mike, with us. I personally think that this was a 1 out of 10 game from San Diego State. I think Alabama missed a lot of threes. I know they take a lot of threes and they kind of live and die by it, but they died by it here. And congrats to San Diego State. They played really well in this one, but I think 9 out of 10 days Alabama wins this game against San Diego State.
Absolutely. And that's kind of been the story of the tournament, though, is they lose. But somehow Furman, Fairleigh Dickinson, these teams are finding ways to win, which is just absurd. I would even say Princeton. Princeton's a great team, but Arizona was supposed to be one of the top teams going into the tournament. They're a really good team. Somehow they coughed it up in the last 8 minutes of that game. But I would say this: San Diego State kind of controlled this game the whole way. Uh, I think Alabama got close a couple times in the second half, but San Diego State kept them at an arm's length. And the Tide couldn't really buy a bucket. I will say that. But kudos to SDSU. I think they got extremely lucky in their Elite Eight game. Sean, there was a foul call there at the end. It looked like a slight bump as the San Diego State guard was getting into the paint. Do you blow the whistle on that?
I didn't watch this entire game. I only caught the last 8 minutes or so. So I don't know how it was officiated. It's tough, but I think I could just see it materializing before it was when
Yeah.
Butler was it got Nemhard on his hip behind him. Said like it's going to be really hard for Nemhard here to not foul him. I think I said that, like he's going to foul him. He's going to foul him, and I think he did. I mean, he had his hand on him. I think you have to call it, but if that's not called, are Aztecs fans losing their minds? I don't think so.
So what I'm going to say is this though: consistency is the key when you're calling these big games.
So was it a
and
foul all
obviously this is
game?
a really
I didn't
tough
watch all
job. That was not a foul all game.
Yeah.
Creighton was not getting that foul call on their end. And I'm not at all saying that the officiating was biased or anything, but you can't swallow the whistle coming down the stretch. At the same time, you can't be trigger happy with the whistle. And that's kind of what that came off to me as that call was not getting called for 35 minutes in that game. So why call it there? Send that game to overtime and see what happens. But nevertheless, that happened. Guy made one of two free throws. Also super confusing last inbounds play. Thought Creighton was going to get 0.2 of a second or 0.3 of a second to try and tip a shot in, but that didn't happen.
Yeah,
so
that clock started super late.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, it's a disappointing way to go.
Yeah.
If that wasn't a foul all game, I don't think that you really can call it there. I think Creighton fans, sort of the football nature of that game, maybe you let it go. But remember, the referees are graded too, and they want to go to the Final Four. So I think we'll see the teams play a little bit more, let them play a little bit more when they're in the Final Four. But a lot of whistles in the tournament, and a lot of missed threes too. Just 32%.
Yes.
Overall.
A lot of missed threes. And you look at teams that were living and dying by the three, they didn't make it to the Final Four. Talking Alabama, talking Baylor, teams that shot the daylights out of the ball during the regular season did not do so in the tournament. So I thought that was also a pretty interesting thing there. The only team that really shot the ball well was Kansas State. We're going to get to them in a little bit, but the ball went flat for them in the Elite Eight game against Florida Atlantic.
Yeah, so San Diego State does get to the Final Four. We talked about Miami kind of beating everybody, the best teams possible that they could have had. San Diego State obviously knocked off the number one overall team, but the three other teams they had to play, not quite as hard. 12 seed in the first round as a 5 seed, 13 seed in the next round. Okay, then you beat Alabama, good for you. And then 6 seed Creighton. Now, Creighton might be better than a 6 seed, but that's kind of how these things happen 90% of the time, I would say. When a higher seed gets to the Final Four, maybe you beat one really good team, and then maybe you get a little lucky the other spots.
Yeah.
Obviously, North Carolina last year comes to mind. They beat Baylor, but then they got St. Peter's in the Elite Eight. So.
Should not. Don't get me started on that game, Sean. Yeah. Oh, man. But, I would say it's not the easiest road we've ever seen to the Final Four. I still think the easiest was Syracuse 2016 when they beat a 10 seed, a 15 seed, an 11 seed, and a 4 seed to get into the tournament. Not quite like that, but it's pretty close.
Yeah, so that last region here at the Mecca of basketball, New York, Madison Square Garden, Kansas State just got by Michigan State in overtime. One of the classics, I think.
Oh man, what a game! In that was a prime time New York moment for a New York City kid, Marquise Noel. 20 points, 19 assists, and those assists were super good. I mean, he looked like the best point guard that we've seen in the last 20
It
years
was
during
almost
that
as
game.
if nobody was guarding him. I know there was, but he would just beat his defender every single time.
Every time. But the passes he made, his ability to control the backcourt in that game was unbelievable. It's perhaps the best point guard performance I've seen since Kemba Walker, and maybe even better.
Yep.
Uh,
That's what people were saying. If obviously they did lose the next round, but if they had made the Final Four after this
yeah,
Sweet 16 game, the storyline was obviously this happened in MSG. This feels like Kemba Walker.
yeah,
Now
and
they did lose the next round, but yeah, go ahead.
I would say one thing about Kansas State, and I've loved Kansas State all year, but I will say I think they weren't necessarily the best team on the court in the Sweet 16 and the elite and the round of 32 game. In both of those games, Kentucky was a better team against them by all metrics.
They just made a couple shots
Kentucky
late.
out-rebounded them by plus 17. Um, in that game, they turned the ball over. I think only 5 or 6 times Kentucky did in that game. Uh, they dominated the ball, but K-State just shot the daylights out of the ball in that game.
Especially late.
Yeah, especially like, and I would say it's very similar against Michigan State. Michigan State just played really well coming down the stretch. I honestly think that Izzo probably outcoached Jerome Tang in that game, but they made some clutch shots coming down the stretch. Tang still coached a great game, and K State moved on. So to me, it almost just seemed like uh, luck kind of caught up to K State in the Elite Eight game. Noel still had an unbelievable game. Noel had 30 points and 12 assists. If he's on an all-tournament team player, I don't know who is, to be quite honest with you. But K-State, they kind of felt like things started to rush for them coming down the stretch in this game. They panicked because they were up and they fell behind. And kudos to Florida Atlantic. They were losing in I think, every single game in the NCAA tournament this year in the second half. And they just stayed composed, came back, and secured the win at the end of the game. They've closed out every single game phenomenally in the tournament.
Yeah, so I think I'll go back to Kansas State for a second here. I think after FDU lost, Kansas State kind of became America's team with their New York guys going back to New York. And like you said, they played really well against Michigan State. You've got Ish Masood, a bench player, solid player, but him going 4 for 6 for downtown. You got the team shooting 56% from the field, and you still needed overtime to beat Michigan State. That's why I thought FAU had a chance on Saturday, and obviously they won on Saturday. They beat Tennessee in the Sweet 16, 62-55.
Yeah.
I was really happy for them that they did it. Second half, outscored them by 12. Real balanced attack there. They've just got so many players. Or go ahead.
Sorry to cut you off real quick. Did you see what Coach May said about Tennessee in the pregame? He said he was touching up on Australian rugby rules.
Yeah, and
to play Tennessee.
it's not super
Well,
off.
down defensively. Only about 55 points.
Yeah, that's not super off by any means. I mean, Tennessee. Let's see. Duke only had 7 free throws in the round of 32 game. FAU had 16. Obviously, some of those coming late, but I was pretty happy to see Tennessee go. I thought they were the worst 4 seed and a little bit undeserving of making it. But FAU took care of business late against Kansas State. They sort of didn't really cover Marquise Noel either. 30 points, 12 assists. I think they made him score a little more and didn't help as much.
Yeah.
And Kansas State still was 10 for 22 from behind the arc, so they still shot it all right. Just a couple misses down the stretch. But 79 points put up by FAU, 4 players in double figures, all 4 being starters. Their center, Vladislav Golden, 14 and 13. they're just a really connected team, and I think Jerome Tang said that after the game. He said, "You guys are the most, communicating, connected team that we've ever played, and that you guys can beat anybody." And
Yeah.
I think they might have a chance to go to the national championship game. But good for
Yeah.
Dusty May. We've got the complete opposite in coaching, in my opinion. Here we have Larinaga at Miami, great coach, but they put all kinds of money in NIL into that team. Probably the most of any team in the country. Pack obviously getting that
Absolutely.
$400,000 deal. Wong coming back and not going to the NBA, and you get a couple other transfers. And then you have Dusty May at FAU, who gets nothing.
Yeah.
Facilities haven't been updated in years. And so it is really this two stark contrasts of college basketball. Obviously, Miami's not a blue blood, but they had money invested into their team. And Florida Atlantic has had virtually none. But
Yep. It's insane that before this, I think when you thought of Florida Atlantic athletics, you thought of Lane Kiffin coaching there for a couple of years. Um, really, it's really incredible that Dustin May was able to put this product on the floor, and I'm kind of shocked that nobody really looked at him getting a big time program or tried to wait for him to get a program, because by all accounts it looks like he's staying in Boca Raton for 1 year. But what a difference a few miles makes. Boca Raton, about 45 miles north of Coral Gables, where the U are, and just very different programs getting to the same spot. Very impressive for them.
so it does say a lot that the storyline is that the Final Four runs through South Florida.
I think college basketball is running through Conference USA right now. That's
Yeah.
what I'm saying.
And Dusty May, it is his fifth season at FAU. He's been over 500 every single year.
Every single year.
A couple postseason appearances in there, and obviously this year everything kind of came together. The former Indiana basketball manager, assistant at Florida, and now 4-0 in the NCAA tournament and 35-3. I feel like they kind of went under the radar towards the end of the year. I mean, they're in the top 25 here and there, but people are saying, "Oh, like you don't have to watch the Conference USA tournament because they're in whether they win or not." They crushed everybody that they played in that tournament. They got really a terrible seed from the committee. In the past, we've seen teams like Murray State, which I'm ranking a 5 seed. Teams, great mid-major teams with ridiculous records, get at least a 7, like Wofford that 1 year. But they got a 9, and every single game has been close. Every single game.
Yeah.
Buzzer beater to beat Memphis, to go from down 1 to up 1. Beat FDU in a game where they were on the ropes. Then they beat Tennessee, and then now they beat Kansas State. They certainly can advance to the national championship, in my opinion. So I guess we'll start there, Mike. San Diego State versus FAU, which will be the first game, 6:09 on CBS. The Aztecs have opened as slight favorites early. What's your prediction for this game between the South and East regional champions?
Yeah, I'm going to go with the Owls in this one. And no disrespect to San Diego State, they played really good basketball to get to this point, but we just saw how connected Florida Atlantic has been. I've been a doubter really since the beginning for them, but they've just played such connected basketball, and they're so elite on the defensive end. We talked about how K-State was still able to score the ball, but in that game, another key to their success was getting Keontae Johnson in foul trouble early and not allowing him to play a full set of minutes. He only played 18 minutes in that game, fouled out. Being able to attack one of their best players and get him out of the game was huge for them. And I like their chances here. They play really good defense, really good connected basketball. They talk a lot. I see them beating San Diego State in a close game.
I think this will be a really good game, and FAU, I'm going to go with the Owls too. I just think they have a couple more ways to win than San Diego State. The Aztecs, their games are low scoring. I know they get to the 70s every once in a while, but 63-57 against Charleston. They won their conference tournament 62-57. Like, these games are leave really small margins for error, and they have a couple of offensive weapons, but the way to beat FAU, I think, is to have just better scorers and players that
Yeah.
they can't guard because they are mostly guards and then a center. But FAU spread it out. They've got nobody. John L. Davis leads the team with 13.9 points, and they have 8 players. Oh no, never mind. 9 players averaging at least 5 points per game. So that's a lot of points from 9 different
Yeah.
options. You got Greenlee, you've got Boyd, you've got Davis, guards that are really good, and just outplayed a couple guards from Kansas State. Or I wouldn't say outplayed, but at least matched Noel and those Memphis guards in the first game. I think FAU wins this game, and they did get a little bit lucky to get FDU in the round of 32, but they could have lost that game too.
You looked great in that game, I gotta
Yeah,
say.
I really did think FDU had a chance, and they almost did win, but obviously they didn't play the 1 seed, they didn't play the 2 seed, but they beat the 3 and the 4 seed and one of the best 8 seeds. So their path was, I think, 3 out of those 4 teams they probably should have, or they were not favored. So I'm going with FAU here too. Just think San Diego State got a little bit lucky with a couple nice matchups to get to this point, and FAU, from what I can tell, has been matchup proof so far. So I think the Owls are going to advance to the national championship game. As crazy as that sounds, one of those 2 teams being in the championship is pretty crazy. Both teams really been around the top 25 all year, but credit to them because I'm not going to say that they 100% deserve a Final Four, but they deserve some tournament success for how good their season's been. 35 wins for FAU, 31 for San Diego State. Those are teams don't get 30 wins rarely get 30
Yeah.
wins. And one of these teams in the other game will, but the other one won't. So Miami, UConn, second game will be 25-30 minutes after the conclusion of the first game. I think I said it earlier. I just think UConn is too much. But I got to start learning to stop doubting Miami because they won 2 games in a row that I didn't think they would. Maybe they have the firepower and the start. All 5 starters being pretty good options to hang with UConn. But the thing with UConn is when Sonogo takes a breather, Donovan Clingan comes in, and he's equally as good. So I'm going to go with UConn here by 5 or so in a game where they're up by 5-7 for most of the game and just kind of hold it there.
Yeah, I like UConn to get off to an early, really good lead in this one. I think they're going to get off to a 10, 12-point lead in the first half. Miami's going to be really resilient, as we've seen all year. They're going to battle back. They're going to get this game tight. But the ability that UConn has to close, especially with such a deep bench, is so clutch for them. They're going to get that taken care of, and I think they're going to end up winning this game by 7 points when it's all said and done because of a few free throws. I think UConn, they're going to play Florida Atlantic in the finals.
Yeah, the one half that UConn did lose this tournament was the first half against Iona. Iona was winning by 2 at halftime. And it seems like Miami might have some of that. Obviously, Iona, the guards made a lot of shots. And they only did it for 20 minutes, but they're winning at halftime. So I think Miami maybe can get, if Wong and Pack really get going, and Jordan Miller, whoever's on him, maybe Jackson will cover him. I'm really intrigued with the matchups in this game, by the way, but somebody's honking outside. But whatever. But I think the matchups are really, really important in this game. I'm sure O'Meara will be on the big, Sonogo or Clingan. But other than that, it could be a whole lot of different matchups. Larinaga, from my point of view, seems to give his guys their game plan, and he kind of just lets them go. And Hurley, obviously, a little more hands-on. But this coaching style from Larinaga, see if you have any thoughts on it. But he doesn't seem to do a whole lot of in-game coaching. Maybe an adjustment here, an adjustment there, how you're covering a wing ball screen or something like that. But he's letting his guys go, and it's paying off.
I think that was what the criticism was for Larinaga for years. And I think that's one of the reasons he was on the hot seat is because he was not really good at making late game adjustments. But when you've got a team that's got such a high basketball IQ like he does, especially with his guard play, uh, you really don't need to do much. And so he's there, kind of making a few adjustments. But once the team has a game plan, they're rolling with it. It's very intriguing.
Yeah, that's a narrative that I don't think works for any other college team, right?
Yeah,
UConn or Miami, when they've been going, they're going, and they've taken a couple lumps. They've taken a run from Indiana in the second half. They were up by 14. I think we're losing by as much as 6 in that one, and they were going to lose the game to Texas, and they fought back, not by doing anything different, really. They got a couple stops. You got a couple shots to drop, and that's why I think Miami has a chance in this game, because they can come back from runs. UConn's going to go on a run. They're going to hit them. It's been at a different point, but they've done like a 15-16-0 type run in every game that they've played this year, and nobody has recovered from it. And I think Miami can. And that's why I think this game will be close either way, but I do think UConn wins, and I do think UConn wins the national championship. I just think that they're a 1 seed if you take away 2 weeks in January, and Sanogo is probably the player of the tournament in my opinion, at least of the teams left, and FAU certainly will struggle with UConn's ability to play 9 players and ability in transition and stuff like that. But I'm assuming you agree. I would be shocked if UConn doesn't win the championship. I'll say that.
yeah. This is UConn's championship to lose for sure. They're going to run into a tough Miami team. And Florida Atlantic, like we said, is a great team, but I just don't think FAU has the firepower to stay with UConn. So this is really UConn's to lose.
So it'll be an interesting one from Houston. I believe it's in the Texans Stadium.
It is NRG.
The championship game will be on Monday. I believe that's 9 p.m. or 8:49, something like that. But that we'll be back after that. We'll start our off-season stuff. I know Joe and I are going to do an episode on each team in the Big Ten. Obviously, we know that you're going away, Mike, but
Yeah, won't be hearing me from much after April 11th,
but yeah, hopefully we get to your our national championship episode out of the way. Maybe some transfers are
yeah.
committed by then, but I think that's it. That's all we have for you today. Thanks for tuning in to the Sports Daily College Basketball Podcast here on March 28th, 2023. We'll be back after the Final Four and then